Thank you, CD, and thank you everyone at Open Mouth. Thank you everyone who's here. Love to see everyone's faces. And yeah, so my name's Natasha. I'm a writer, primarily a poet. I've been teaching for many years. This is my favorite kind of like workshop open format. So I'm excited to be with you all today. And just to kind of dive in to the topic, I did like design this workshop a couple years ago, and it's the title of it is like as it is written, so it shall be done. So the premise of this workshop is really kind of honoring the fact that when you put something like out into the universe in this way through writing, it is kind of like a form of manifestation. It's kind of like um, entering and like focusing on that element of writing and how that is a very like powerful tool. And, many people use it as a tool for their life and like their goals and their dreams, but you can also use it as a tool for, what you want, your writing to do and what you want your writing to become, how you want, you know, um, you don't have to write poetry in this workshop. You can write any kind of writing. What do you want your characters to do? What do you want your characters to believe, to become? So that is kind of like the focus that we will have today. And so we're going to be reading two pieces, and we're going to do two exercises, and we'll share a little bit. So that's kind of the feel for today. I do want to encourage, everyone, if you need to take a break, if you need to go to the bathroom, like, bio break, just do that. If you want to write in the chat, like, oh, I'm stepping away for a little bit, just in case I like call on you and like you're not there, that's fine. And feel free to unmute, write in the chat, use all of the tools that we have today. So first thing I want to do is just like some introductions. Like we're a pretty good size today. So just to get some introductions in the room, feel free to write in the chat, or you can unmute. You can write your name, your pronouns, and what like color is your energy right now. If you were to describe, if you were to do it like an aura reading for yourself, like what would your color be today? I'll write it in the chat as well. Oh, we've got some purples today. Love that. Purpley blue. Sounds great. More purple. Payne's gray. I love that's very specific. Jen, yellow. Another purple. I'm feeling like a hunter green today. Nikki is orange purple. Love it. We've got some orange. Mushroom. That's great. RJ's blue. I love it. All right, great. So just to get us kind of started and warmed up, kind of two concepts that I want to just kind of like start discussing together is the idea of like fate and like destiny. So my kind of like opening question is, if you were to define and like distinguish fate and destiny, like how would you define them? Like, oh, this feels more like fate, whereas that feels more like destiny. Like, what do you think the difference between those two things are? Okay, so Kim says, fate I equate with someone else's power, destiny more myself and my actions. That's a great answer. Kim, do you mind unmuting and just talking a little bit about how you got there?
I don't know how I got there. That is just like, it's sort of like a genre sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Where like in fantasy, I would be like, it's fate. And like in sci-fi, I'd probably like say it would be destiny or something in that nature, the hero's journey. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's how, yeah, archetypes.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that you kind of like attach it to genre styles. That's cool. PJ says, destiny feels more like purpose and life intention, whilst fate feels more beyond my control and inevitable. PJ, could you talk a little bit more about like purpose and life intention? I think that's interesting. I don't
Sorry.
know.
Where am I? Well, for me, fatalistic thing almost have like an overarching, almost godlike imposed on me, you whatever type of energy, while
Yeah.
destiny is about, for example, say a prince and you're born and you're meant to be king and you're working towards it all your life. Is that's what your life purpose is? That's what it is. But it's also changeable. You can choose to abdicate. You can choose to change your own destiny by picking something different and working towards that. So it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like an intentional. It's sort of preset, but not obligatory.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah, I love this idea that like that destiny feels more like in our control and that we can change it, and that fate has this kind of like Heather says, like the difference for me, fate is usually negative, like we often hear the word fate like in connotation with death, like that was their fate. um Destiny is usually positive, maybe more of my own agency and destiny. Yeah, I feel like we're all kind of gravitating towards that. Awesome. These are great definitions. um so I'm going to share a little PowerPoint just to guide us along here. Let me So here I have like the actual definitions, which you will notice that, of course, in classic like Webster's dictionary fashion, like fate is the word fate is in the definition of destiny, and the word destiny is like in the definition of fate. So like, as we're talking about, these words are very linked. And so, as we're writing today and as we are thinking about these concepts, try to have that like guide in the sense of like, am I writing from the sense of like fate? Or am I writing from the sense of like destiny? And see if those things are different for you, or maybe they feel the same. I just think those are like kind of interesting lenses to put on today as we read some of the things that we look about and as we write today. So yeah, so these definitions, I'm just kind of putting here to think about side by side. But when looking at these, I also really enjoyed that destiny has, in the definition, the concept of hidden power. And I think that's what we're kind of tapping at today, that like this agency, this power. And so that's kind of the thing that I think is so potent in writing, in that you can feel a sense of like hidden power between, what is happening on the page and like what are the different dynamics, either between, you know, like what the speaker, if it's poem, like what the speaker is saying, versus like what's happening in the plot or what's happening with the character. um there's kind of this idea of like, you know as a writer, like you were kind of playing God, like sometimes, because you're like determining what's happening. And so, also think about like what kind of genre you want to write today. Like maybe you want to write something nonfiction that is about like your actual life, what kind of hidden power, like, can you access, or can you at least be aware of? I think there's all kind of forces that are a part of our life and shape our life. How can you tap into that, and how can you kind of bring some awareness to that? All right, so how do we access the hidden power? There's many ways. So we're going to just look at a couple of writers and see how they do it. So the first writer that we're going to look at is Anne Carson. Anne Carson is an incredible poet. So Anne Carson so she is a scholar. So she's a scholar of like Greek, like philosophers and stories. And so she often combines that into, poetry of like her own life, everyday life, and has many books that kind of like mix those two things together. So this piece that we're going to be looking at is from her book called Float. I have it here physically. So it's basically a book that you'll see that it has this kind of like clear vinyl around it. And it's a book that is like made of many books, essentially. So you'll see that there are like many little chapbooks that are included. And so the point of this book is that you don't necessarily have to read it in like the order that it comes in. And so there are all these kind of like individual stories, poems, performances that kind of create this like, this like mass. Even in the beginning, there's like an epigraph that it says, a collection of 22 chapbooks whose order is unfixed and whose topics are various. Reading can be free fall. So it's this kind of like uncharted experience. And so the poem that we're going to be reading today is from that. And I also I don't always like to give like preamble or like preface. Let me stop sharing for when like we read something. But for this one, I feel like it's kind of useful to know what she's talking about first before we read it. So I'm going to give a little information about what she's talking about. Okay, so this poem is about a person, Faisal bin Ali Jabbar. The subject of her poem is an engineer from Yemen whose brother-in-law and nephew were mistakenly killed by a US drone strike in 2012. So there is like mention of like violence a little bit and death. The US has never admitted responsibility for this. So lawyers for the human rights organization Reprieve are helping Jabbar seek an apology. So he awaits a judgment from the Federal Court of Appeals in Washington. So that's kind of like the premise of the poem. And then I'm going to put the link to the poem in the chat so that you have it. But then I'm gonna share my screen for it as well. Okay. Okay. So it's called Fate, Federal Court, Moon by Anne Carson. I think I'll read part of it and then we can kind of popcorn read, just because it's kind of long. Okay. The fate of the earth, the fate of me, the fate of you, the fate of Faisal, the fate of the court where Faisal will plead his case, the fate of the court's bias. Every court has a bias. It sifts to the surface gradually. The fate of whomever we drink to after court. the fate of that branch of mathematics that deals with dead-end depth, the fate of Yemen, where Faisal will probably never return, the fate of the engineering job Faisal had in Yemen before the events in question, the fate of the simple random walk and its difference from the homesick random walk, concepts from a mathematics textbook I read once about dead-end depth, the fate of Montreal, where Faisal lives now, the fate of his family, the ones still alive back in Yemen, and the fate of the bridal couple still alive, whose wedding was the target of the drone pilot, a mistake. I'm going to pop it to someone else. Kim, could you read a couple of sentences?
Sure. The fate of the others, not still alive, a mistake. The fate of the moon that rose over us as we drove through the mountains of Pennsylvania to be present at Faisal's day in court. The fate of the silveriness of the moon that no words can ever describe. The fate of the bright, sleepless night. The fate of our phones, which we decide to take to the courthouse at 9 a.m. and relinquish at the door. The fate of two guys doing a job interview in the cafeteria. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, where we stopped for coffee on the way to the courtroom 31. Been around the block, says one guy. Army does the billing, says another guy. The fate of so many men in suits and ties. The fate of being lost in marble corridors. The fate of being much too early at courtroom 31. The fate of the knot of lawyers who surround Faisal as he enters the new suit. Okay, I don't popcorn to somebody else.
Yeah, could you just pick someone?
I guess Jen Williams.
Yeah,
So we're at,
I lost it. The fate of
so you could just
congratulating him?
start the fate of the knot of lawyers.
The fate of the knot of lawyers who surround Faisal as he. Sorry, I'm losing my spot. I could bring it back up.
Do you see it?
Yeah, I had my own up zoomed in. Sorry.
It's okay.
No, I've totally lost my spot.
Do you see it on like the, where
The
I'm
share
sharing?
screen. Yes. The fate of the knot of lawyers who surround Faisal as he enters in a new suit. The fate of congratulating him on his new suit. The fate of his smile. His smile is great. The fate of the numerous clerks who pour glasses of water for the judges and generally fuss around. The fate of the appellant, whose case precedes Faisal's, which concerns a warrant so lacking in a probable cause that something to do with Garcia, something to do with gangs and a constitutional path. The fate of the pearls won by Judge Dillard, who sits on the far right of the bench, which curve like teeth below her actual teeth. The fate of straining to hear what Faisal's lawyer, with his back to us, says to the judges. The fate of him, perhaps saying that the government is asking the court to refrain from judging, asking the court to step back without knowing what it is stepping back from. The fate of proportionality, a matter of context. The fate of what is or is not a political question. And I will popcorn to PJ.
Where we at? Sorry. Okay, where you've highlighted. I see that.
Yes.
The fate, the fate of the president called Al-Shifa, with which everyone seems familiar. The fate of a publicly acknowledged program of targeting people who might be a danger to us. The fate of inscrutable acronyms. The fate of me totally losing the thread of the argument as we distinguished merit from standing. The fate of what Faisal is seeking, which is now given as declaratory relief, new phrase to me. The fate of plaintiffs who have no chance of being harmed in the future due to being deceased. a wording that gives pause. The fate of how all this may depend on her pearls, her teeth. The fate of the sentence, we are really sorry we made a mistake, which Judge Dillard utters in a hypothetical context, but it's still good to hear. I popcorn to Alexander.
The fate of the government lawyer who is blonde and talks too fast, using jurisdictional many times and adding, as the relief sought is unavailable. The fate of wondering why it is unavailable to say sorry. The fate of Judge Dillard's invitation to the government lawyer to tell the plaintiff how he might exhaust all administrative avenues of redress, as the government claims he should have done before bringing this case. Where would he go? Judge Dillard asks with apparent honest curiosity. If you were he, where would you go? The fate of our bewildered conversation afterwards about why she said this, whose side she is on, what she expects Faisal's lawyer to do with it now. The fate of the tuna sandwiches eaten with Faisal while debating this. The fate of his quietness while others talk. I will popcorn to, how about Heather?
Okay. The fate of the smile, which seems to invite the soul centuries ago, serving tea, let's say, to guests. The moon above them, joy, the fate of disinterestedness, of joy, of what would Kant say, of not understanding what kind of thing the law is anyway. For example, in its similarity to mathematics, for they both pretend to perfect objectivity, but objectivity is a matter of wording, and words can be, well, a mistake. The fate of the many thoughts that go on in Faisal when he is quiet, or the few thoughts, how would I know? So popcorn, somebody else. About Julie. Okay.
I don't hear Julie, so I'm just going to take it home.
There you go. Thank you.
The fate of the deep sea diver that he resembles, isolated, adrift. The fate of him back in his kitchen in Montreal next week or next year, sitting on a chair or standing at the window. The moon that by then, perhaps a thin cry, perhaps gone. The fate of simplicity, of randomness, of homesickness, of dead ends, of souls. Who can say how silvery it was? Where would he go? Sorry? All right. Stop sharing. So I know it's a long one, but hopefully you were able to kind of get those threads that are kind of given to us in the title, Fate, Federal Court, Moon. So Anne Carson is kind of like weaving like, this idea of fate, like the fate of language of like what is said in the actual court, fate as in death, and also mentioning like the moon, which I feel like is the most common poetic gesture ever, but it's beautiful, in that it kind of gives us that sense of like eeriness and that sense of like the moon, has this kind of destiny to it as well. So today we're gonna just get into a bit of writing. So feel free to get comfortable, have a piece of paper or something on your computer. And we're just gonna write for a couple of minutes and then we're going to share a little bit. So we're going to kind of model, what Anne Carson is doing here, in the sense that she's repeating the sense of the fate of, and that is kind of like the engine of the poem that is kind of like giving it structure, but also giving it this kind of like life, that kind of anything that you say after that can have this kind of like totality to it. So let me share my screen again. So our prompt is going to be, you can start every line with the fate of, and you can use this as kind of like a free write. Think of this as kind of like our warm up. And so, just start from anywhere. Like, don't think too much about what you're writing, so that you kind of allow your mind to like create some free associations. Or you can also kind of model by like starting with her title. So you can start with like fate, noun, it could be like an event in your life. And the verb could be like something important to you. So like it could be like fate, birth, flower, like something like that. And kind of like just start by talking about, it could be about how you were born. So even using the title can kind of be like a jump start. And if you're really like struggling to think about like, okay, how do I, like sometimes when you're doing free writing, you can kind of get stuck. I'll put this in the chat. There's like a random word generator. So you can like use that to kind of be like the fate of the random word generator is going to say like persimmon or like something, and like let that kind of let you unravel imaginatively. So I'm going to put, I think like 8 minutes on the timer. And I will give you like a 5-minute warning. So the trick to free writing is try not to stop. Like try not to like let yourself like wander. Do not read back and edit. Just like write furiously for 8 minutes. That's kind of how you let yourself get into those weird places. Are there any questions before we? Oh, CD, thank you for putting the prompt in the chat. Before we go. All right, and I will be here. So if there are questions midstream, I will answer them as well. All right, 8 minutes on the clock. You have about 5 minutes left. Now you have 2 minutes left, so start wrapping things up. All right, we just have a couple of seconds, so feel free to wrap up any last sentence or thought that came up as you were writing. Awesome. I hope that was generative. I hope, you were able to kind of keep writing and not get too stuck, as sometimes it can be difficult. So we're going to kind of move along, and for the next kind of subject we're going to talk about, we're just going to kind of walk through it and read some poems. And then the last kind of subject we'll do is more of a generative writing exercise. So this book I also have with me. It's a wonderful little small book. It's called Grapefruit. It's by Yoko Ono. And it's such a fun book. It's a great gift. We want to give someone a gift. So the subtitle is A Book of Instruction and Drawings. And this is also a great book to read like with a child, like if you want to teach or show a young person poetry and like what it could be like. It has a very like playful energy to it, and so a lot of it Yoko has done as like performances and like gallery spaces and things like that. But what I love about this book is that it speaks like kind of like in the imperative, in the in the sense of like, do this, do that, a set of rules. And so what's fun about like thinking about that from like a writing space is like enacting some of them, or like pretending that some of them are like coming true, and seeing what happens after that. So like often, this is the kind of book that I think any artist should have, because you could just open it up and read a random poem, and often it'll kind of like spark something. So we're just gonna read a couple of them just to kind of get a sense of it, and then we're gonna move into our final writing exercise. So let me share my screen. And these are just some that I picked out that I thought were sweet. There's some that are more silly and more strange. Okay. So I'll just read this one and then I'll pop it to, they're all very tiny. I'll pop it to someone to read the next one. This one is Touch Poem. I think that's 4. I'm rusty on my Roman numerals right now. Feel the wall. Examine its temperature and moisture. Take notes about many different walls. 1963, autumn. I'm going to pick, let's see. Eve. Eve, would you be open to reading this next piece? It's called Collecting Piece.
Collecting piece. Collect sounds in your mind that you have overheard through the week. Repeat them in your mind in different orders one afternoon. 1963, autumn.
Thank you. Can you pick someone to read the next one?
Annie?
Snow piece. Think that snow is falling. Think that snow is falling everywhere, all the time. When you talk with a person, think that snow is falling between you and on the person. Stop conversing when you think the person is covered by snow.
Thank you. And can you pick someone to read this one?
Yes, Heather.
Go shake hands with as many people as possible. Write down their names. Make it a nice handshake by holding a flower in your hand, perfume, or wash your hand. Let's see, how about Aisha?
I think, is there another? No, that was the last one.
Oh, sorry. There you go.
Awesome. Great. So you see that, some of them are kind of like very like playful and joyous and kind of like whimsical. So again, I just kind of encourage you, one, to check it out, and two, to think about when reading these, like using them as kind of prompts for writing and thinking about how you can expand on some of these prompts, some of these actions, and like what that would look like, or what that would feel like for whatever character kind of world you want to build. So to get into our final, oh yeah, I'll write it. It's called Grapefruit. Great. Awesome. So the last kind of like source we will look at is Brian Eno's Oblique Strategies. So Brian Eno, musician, he created these oblique strategies. So there's a website, and then there's also like physical cards, like kind of like in a box, like Cards Against Humanity kind of style. Both are fine. Today we'll use the website. And so the purpose of the oblique strategies, he created them as kind of prompts, like to create music. So it's just kind of this, again, kind of like generator. And so he would like read whatever the generator said and try to create like a musical composition that encapsulates that thought or that feeling or that idea. So today we're going to use it to generate writing. I think the oblique strategies is like really great for any kind of art, like even visual art, just because they're also like different and interesting. So I'm going to put the link in the chat. And then I will share our screen for our prompt. So yeah, we'll do this final prompt and then we'll share out at the end. Okay. So these are my oblique strategies of like, okay, how do I work with these? So it's just some ideas of how you can go about it, because you'll essentially open the website, it'll have like a phrase and you'll be like, okay, what do I do with it? So you can use it as the first line of whatever you're writing and kind of like go from there, again, in this kind of like free writing, like generative space. You could draw it out. A lot of artists draw it. It's like very common for these. You can like, okay, if you like to doodle, if you like to draw it out and draw out like what this, a lot of them are very abstract. So like to try to make it realistic is sometimes interesting. And then write from the drawing. Another idea is to imagine a scenario in which the strategy is coming into place. Like that's more of like a narrative like approach to it. You could also do the opposite thing that the strategy says. Like think of like, what is the opposite of this? Sometimes those are like kind of funny. You can also add or take away words from the strategy to your liking and like follow that, like edit what the strategy is saying. Or you can try to define it. Like you could try to, make a definition of like what this even means and where this is even coming from, and like kind of make up a definition. So depending on your writing, like your kind of writing style, these are kind of some approaches that are fun to use for the oblique strategies. And so sometimes people like open it up and you just kind of pick the first one you like and you go from there. Sometimes people will like open it up and like write down a couple. Like I've done that. I've written down the oblique strategies that I like. And sometimes you can kind of like collage them together or kind of use them to create sentences. So however you want to use it, like that's the joy of using it. It's really kind of like a choose your own adventure type space. So I'm going to give us another 8 minutes on this one. CD, is it okay if we go like a little over 3?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I'm going to give us another 8 minutes. So feel free to play, feel free to kind of like use the website how you want, and you can mix a couple of the strategies together, especially if you kind of like finish a piece midstream. So yeah, feel free to play around and feel free to let us know if you have questions. So yeah, this is going to take us to 301, and then we'll have time to share after. We have about 5 minutes left, so keep going. We have about 2 minutes left, so start wrapping things up. All right, we just have a couple of seconds, so feel free to finish that last thought or that last sentence. Awesome. Oh, thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was a very sweet message. Awesome. So yeah, I want to kind of hear how that went for everyone. So in sharing, I always like to frame it just because there's many ways to share. You can feel free to like, since we did 2 prompts, you could like read a couple lines from each one. If they're really short, you could like read both. If you don't want to actually like read any of them, you could just kind of talk about like, oh, this is how I like approached it, or this is what I wrote about. Or you could just talk about the experience. Like you could say like, oh, the first one was like really hard for me, or like the second one, like I felt like I got into a groove more. So there are many ways that you can let us know how that was. So does anyone want to volunteer first? Because then I can also just ask people. Ali, do you want to go? Yeah, great. Oh yeah, you can use the raise hand function. So Ali and then Nikki.
Hi, my name is Alexander. So I liked both. I got a prompt from the website, right? It started as listen to the quiet voice, right? Both of my writings were based on, I guess, trauma from the past, right? So I will read the second one. I think it's a little shorter. It could probably, I'm pretty sure people relate once they understand if you listen to the quiet voice, right? So listen to the quiet voice that is sometimes so quiet you can barely hear it, yet at times so loud nothing can drown it out. That voice that tells you exactly what you need to hear, yet not always necessarily what you want to hear. That quiet voice that reassures your decisions, not only the major decisions like whom to marry, but the little ones like what type of cheese you want for your cold cuts this week. When you pay no attention to this voice, you lose all sense of self. You begin to listen to other people's voices and make decisions based on what other people say. You stop developing into an individual and start turning into anyone and everyone else. That quiet voice should never steer you wrong. That quiet voice is your intuition, your instinct, your self-worth. Without that question, without that quiet voice, what are you?
Nice. Thank you so much for sharing. So like naturally you kind of get into that like second person you, which I feel like in writing, sometimes people think that's like a taboo, that it's like,
Sometimes
oh,
it's turned on and off,
yeah. But it can be powerful. Like it can be powerful to generate in that space. Sometimes people like start there and then kind of veer into another like POV, like first person, third person. So great. Thank you for sharing.
No,
Next
thank
we
you.
have Nikki.
Go, Nikki, go. Shush.
Okay, so let's see. I guess I can read the last one we just did. Our obliques, whatever that was called. Let's see. Ours was you can only make one dot at a time. So you can only make one dot at a time, or line, or step, or thought, or movement, one that leads to another, domino effect. Watch the pieces fall where they may. Let chaos become order, become fate, become destiny. See the bigger picture for the smaller trees in the distance, painted against the horizon. Watch the sunset set the trees afire. Let the orange bleed to red, red to green, to blue. Remind yourself the night sky isn't black, just a combination, just darkness, a resetting, a reminder. You can only make one dot at a time.
Yes. That was so expansive. So gorgeous. Thank you so much for sharing. Does anyone else want to share? All right. If no one else wants to share, that's fine. I won't pick on too many people. But awesome. That is all from me. Thank you all so much. I hope some of these sources were really like generative for you. Oh, Aisha, you want to go? Yay. Oh, you're mute, or I can't hear you. Oh, we still can't hear you. No. I don't know. Sometimes on the phone, if you didn't click like the audio, okay, let it be. That's fine. Thank you so much. Yeah, well, that's all for me. I hope some of these sources are really generative for you. Feel free to check out more Anne Carson, Yoko Ono, Brian Eno. Those are the people that we heard from today. And yeah, thank you to Open Mouth for having this lovely workshop. This is like every month. So if you want to continue writing and generating and have it be a practice, I think this is a good space to do that. And then, yeah, we have the reading tonight. So if you want to listen to, some of these strategies in my own writing, you can feel free to do that. And there will be other opening readers that are going to be there as well, which will be lovely. So CD, do you have any last thoughts?
Yeah, thank you so much for all your wonderful insights into this. I love Brian Eno, love Yoko Ono, so that's always delightful to hear their non-musical work talked about as well. Please, I put some links in the chat. Please come to the reading tonight at 7 p.m. Central Time. Natasha will be reading some of the wonderful work in her forthcoming collection. I'm excited for that. And we hope to see you at another event soon. Thank you all for coming here. We're excited and delighted that you made it out. So have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Have a good Sunday.